Greetings from self-isolation. I'm actually here in an asylum. It's called The Family. But you know, modern families, basically, they don't have to hang out with each other, you know, day after day after day after day after day, and probably month after month after month. But anyway, we'll work out a way of not completely going insane, hopefully. And the alternative, of course, if we go out, we're likely to end up getting something not too nice, COVID-19. So what I'm going to cover today is what we covered in our first tutorial 2 weeks ago, and it's from an article in the a medical journal, the New England Journal of Medicine, and it was entitled History in a Crisis, Lessons for COVID-19. And it brings up quite a few general themes and things that clearly show how we've generally underestimated, with a few exceptions. Definitely Bill Gates is an exception, as most of you know. We have grossly underestimated the threat. And if there is a threat, a lot of us, I think, well, it's going to be in the poor countries, you know, in those countries where they don't essentially have a medical system. It's going to be in the refugee camps, but it's not going to be somewhere in a modern, you know, society with sophisticated possibilities, at least for those that have medical insurers, you know, that will be well protected. And there's been a sense, I think, also of downgrading health systems. I followed the situation in the UK for years and years. My hero was Nye Bevan, a Welshman, a miner originally, who fought for the introduction of a national health system almost on his own, and was succeeded when I was just a kid in basically introducing it, and it's been with the United Kingdom ever since, and the majority of people there are very grateful. So even that system, because obviously there'd been downgrading over the last so many years because of, you know, budget issues, even that system has reached the point of near crisis this weekend, with a lack of supplies to protect the health workers on the front line. And it became a very political issue, and there are military planes, RAF planes, flying to Turkey and hopefully flying back with PPE, with protection equipment, notably with gowns, so that they can carry on, because basically the system has run out of this type of protection equipment. So in this article, they pointed out that back in 1970, actually in 1972, there were articles from experts at the time who were essentially saying that there hasn't been a major outbreak for over 50 years, that pandemics are a thing of the past. That whatever outbreak occurs with modern medicine, you know, improvements in vaccines, immunology, and other aspects of healthcare, with antibiotics, that we can handle all these things. We're in the right place. Well, you know, it's always dangerous to make strong statements about anything, and essentially, you know, something which is not even considered a living organism, a virus, has brought us to our feet. And the realization, which some have realized for many, many years, that something like that could, you know, wipe out society as we know it now, to a point that we will not be the same once we emerge from this catastrophe, you know, is now very much a part of, at least thinking people, most people's, you know, psyche. They now realize, you know, that essentially something has to be done. And we are at war, and hopefully the type of funding which has been thrown into destroying ourselves, you know, namely nuclear warfare, We can do that. Okay, we've definitely got the weapons now to do it 100 times over at least. So all warring parties. So, you know, maybe we should start looking at the threat that's now emerged, which was always there through centuries and centuries from the beginning of history of mankind, you know, the microbes. And as travel has facilitated the movement of more and more people, with airlines, you know, transporting more and more and more people all over the world, with cities that have become more and more crowded with the burgeoning global population, with the stress that has become more and more prevalent in modern society and modern economies. These are the factors. Crowding and stress are the major factors in facilitating disease, and then in turn the virus, if it has the transmission properties and the virulence, can move from these stressed individuals to more stressed individuals. No shortage of stressed individuals, I would say. So anyway, the 1970s were a golden period, you know, in many ways. We didn't come close to a nuclear war, but don't worry about that. But we had epidemics under control. Medicine was at a good point in history. And then along came AIDS, which initially seemed to be just confined, you know, to a population, you know, that homosexuals basically was not in the general population. So, you know, there wasn't consideration generally that we should do much about it. It was identified as caused by a virus, and it's still ongoing. There have been developments in basically at least easing the symptoms, but we still don't have control of that disease, and it obviously spread out into a wider population than it previously was found. And Ebola, I could also mention herpes, Legionnaire's disease, venereal diseases, particularly syphilis, etc. Ebola, which has been a major threat, but is largely confined to West Africa. However, it's inevitable that sooner or later it will spread, and it did indeed spread to the United States, but thanks to the expertise of the CDC and the World Health Organization with their workings in the outbreaks in Africa, they were able to bring it under control here in the United States. And then things start to get more interesting. We have coronavirus appearing on the scene for the first time as a major pathogen threatening pandemics and significant loss of life. There was MERS, the Middle East branch of the coronavirus family, and it's actually spread, for instance, into South Korea, a very good example, where through that experience, undoubtedly, the South Korean medical profession has developed the methods and the knowledge to kind of tackle these things seriously, and at least at this point in time, they've had very successful results. And I think a lot of that was due to their prior experience. They knew not to kind of take COVID-19 as something of marginal consequence. So let's look at the how society reacts. And this is typical of all major outbreaks, going back to 1918, 1919, the Spanish flu, and even before that to major plagues caused by Yersinia pestis. Initially people ignore the clues, so that's the first thing. I think we have so many examples currently of this. And then secondly, the next phase is, once faced with an acceleration of death, people start to demand or offer explanations. So we go through a period where, okay, we're taking it seriously, but not really, confused, and basically it's political rather than realization we have to do something quickly. And then phase 3, we generate public responses because the deaths are now significant in many parts of the world. And in this phase, there start to be dramatic examples of disruption in society. People are quarantined in self-isolation, and the economy is in disarray. Every day it gets worse. My son actually just came to me and told me, "Have you seen the oil prices, Dad?" And I said, "No, it's $2 a gallon." I think you read that wrong. It's $20 a gallon. He said, "No, it's 2." I said, "Good grief." So certain countries, for instance, are so dependent on oil that it means, their economies are totally, essentially destroyed. I mean, they're making it. Even those countries that have a plentiful supply of oil, their cost of production is in the cheapest instance. The lowest cost instance is at least $20, but more typically $40 to $50 or even $60 to $70 per gallon. So all of a sudden they have no possibilities whatsoever. So now we're faced with a pandemic, and if we go back to the situation with Spanish flu, which obviously isn't the coronavirus, but is an example where there are many parallels in terms of the damage it caused, the disruption of society, disruption of the medical services, the deaths of so many people, particularly where there's crowding or where they ignore self-isolation and quarantine. Then, we have situations where we should look and say, hang on now, we don't want to do this. So Philadelphia is an example. And here they had a parade to honor the end of World War I, and the troops marched in a victory parade in Philadelphia, despite the advice of the medical profession. And the end result of that was that they had the worst outbreak against, amongst many outbreaks in major cities in the United States. You can compare that with other cities. San Francisco, for instance, that were much quicker to respond and to bring in quarantine self-isolation. And though, there were still many deaths, it was much less than there were in those cities where they had disregarded, these recommendations. So essentially with what we have now with COVID-19 is the same situation as people faced in 1918-19, because we don't have any vaccines. There is nothing really available, even theoretically. We can try things, but the chances that any of these will work in a very effective way is low. Okay, so we're contingent on a vaccine. In terms of, the balance between economies and health, if it's anything like previous epidemics, we have to do everything to contain and control the infections. Because if we don't, if we ignore this, there will be additional waves of disease and more pandemic situations. And also, it's very important to try and contain the virus and the disease in the very poor countries. Because if we don't do that, it may not be very obvious what the consequences are. That other than the obvious humanitarian effect, those situations, which can be bad enough, will be breeding grounds, obviously. Think of refugee camps where people have no hope. They'll be breeding grounds for untold, unbelievable situations in the future. But just from a humanitarian point of view, I think we all want to be part of the initiative that was in our on our screens this weekend, on our video devices, where people are coming together to support the World Health Organization. It's a global issue, that's what pandemics are, and it requires a global approach. All right, what else did we learn from that article? We learned that basically things are very definitely different from what they were pre-1970, that there have been a whole series of threats, any of which could have been like COVID-19. So why epidemics come and go, we don't have a clear understanding. If you take the 1918 Spanish flu, the second wave, when troops came back on troop ships to the United States, was more aggressive and caused more deaths than the first wave, which was bad enough. And then there was a third wave, and then it basically disappeared in 1919. So that was fortuitous, and I have not really been able to find out a good explanation. We know that viruses mutate, so they can become more virulent, and that has been offered as an explanation of the second wave. The third wave, possibly was because there were further mutations, but this is theoretical. What we do know is because they were able to recover the H1N1 virus from a cadaver that had been perfectly preserved, at least the lung tissue had been perfectly preserved in the frozen tundra. They were able to isolate the virus intact, sequence it, and then in the late I think it was 2018, I should say, I believe. Anyway, in very recent times, they were able to actually synthesize this virus, the virus that's responsible for the Spanish flu. And it's kind of scary stuff. What they determined is it's a highly sophisticated virus, and just looking at the virulence and the basis of that virulence, it's very clear that this was something which was extremely potent, very easily transmitted, highly virulent. And of course, it's attracted the attention naturally of people looking at biowarfare and biodefense, and actually we'll be going into that topic in our course this week, starting with the historical aspects, actually how society spread things like the plague, and subsequently other diseases attempted to use bioweapons, and that came to a head really in the two world wars, World War I and particularly World War II. Society took our knowledge and was very interested in developing bioweapons. Now, back in the 1970s, right, from 1972 through 1975, countries realized, that this is taking things too far, and they have had a lot of research invested in biodefense. So this is, something that you might say is negative, but in reality, that's exactly where we have a lot of the expertise for coming up with effective mechanisms, because for combating pandemics,